Good evening all, and welcome. I hope you have your engines ready, because tonight we're going to go trucking. So get comfortable, strap in your seatbelt, and let the darkness take control. I was driving for Costco a few years back. It was around this time of year. We usually took extra shipments to various locations due to the holiday season. We got a call that one of our locations in rural Kentucky needed a restock of giant spiders. They knew I was a fast driver, so I was given the last-minute late-night duty. I loaded up my truck and headed out on the 265. It was around 3 a.m. when I started to have this eerie feeling. I chalked it up to just being tired and popped a couple of NoDoz. About 15 minutes later, the road started to fog up. I mean, more so than any other time before or since. It got to the point where I had to pull off to the side and wait. There weren't any other cars on the road, so I figured I could wait until it cleared up a bit. About 5 minutes of still waiting in silence, my truck goes dead. No lights, no engine, nothing. I tried to crank it, but it was like the battery was dead. I try my CB, but cannot get anyone on. I check my cell phone, and there's no signal. As I'm sitting there contemplating my next move, I hear what sounds like a child crying. It slowly morphed into a woman crying, or at least, that's how it sounded to me. Now I'm a big man, 6'3", 250 pounds, but refused to exit my cab. I did roll down my window and ask if anyone needed help. At that point, the crying stopped. Then I heard what sounded like a sinister laugh. At that point, I felt like the laughter was directed at me. I rolled up my window, and it seemed like the more scared I became, the louder the laugh went. Then as soon as it started, it stopped. And just like that, my truck started back up and the fog dissipated. I drove out of there like a bat out of hell. I get to the next truck stop and pull in. I run to the bathroom and pour water on my face and ask myself, did that really just happen? I go out to the diner and see this fellow with a John Deere hat, red flannel and blue jeans. I needed to know if anyone else had experienced it too. I go up to him and say, "Excuse me, are you a fellow trucker? Because I just had one hell of an experience." He says he's not, but says that that road is most certainly haunted. I know somewhere that I will not be driving again anytime soon. The scariest thing I've ever seen happen in the range of 40 minutes, and I don't think I've ever been more scared and worried each time I saw the next event. I was involved in a 3-car accident back in October of 2012. Me and my girlfriend at the time had just decided to go on a late night run for donuts. I pulled out onto the street and waited at the empty intersection. Since there was no traffic and it was so late, I thought I could afford looking down and opening my chocolate milk for the ride home. As soon as I pulled the chocolate milk out of the bag, I heard the most movie-like sound effects of tires screeching and a huge crash. I don't have time to do anything but look at the source of the noise. That's when I caught a glimpse of the scariest thing I'd seen. A 2.5-ton truck coming straight at me. In the very short time it took me between the first crash and the truck crushing my car, My brain had time to register three things. There was a really bad accident that I was about to be a part of. A 5,000-pound truck is barreling towards me, isn't even touching the ground at this point. There's nothing in the world that I can do to stop this from happening. The truck hits me. Hard. I remember looking at the truck coming towards me, and then being able to close my eyes and let out a whimper before someone rubbing my face and telling me everything was okay. I open my eyes. It's my girlfriend. We were 3 lanes over from where we were originally. The driver's side of the car was invading every inch of my space before it was actually hurting me, and I realized I didn't have a scratch on me. I'm gonna be okay. We climb out of the passenger side, and I see the full extent of the damage. My car made it out okay in comparison to the rest of the vehicles. 2 other trucks lay in shambles in different parts of the road. I run to the one that hit me and hear a young man screaming with the door open, claiming he can't breathe and that his ribs are open. I carefully help him up the truck and over to the other side of the road, where I inspect, to the best of my abilities, the state of his injuries. He keeps screaming like he's dying, but I see no marks on him whatsoever. He's not bleeding, there's no immediate bruising, and when I put my hand on his chest, he's able to draw a full enough breath that I'm not worried about him. He's hurting, yeah, but as far as I can tell, he's not dying. I tell my girlfriend to stay with him and comfort him, as I go check out the 3rd truck, the instigator of the whole accident. As I stand up, I'm hit with the next on the list of scariest shit I've ever seen, and it's only been a minute and a half. I look past my car, the Titan, and to the 3rd truck, a GMC. That's when I realize this isn't going to be a walk in the park going to help whoever was in that truck. The young man was screaming when I came to him in the Titan, but not like the people in the truck. I could hear them now, like I can hear them then. Those screams weren't screams of pain. Those screams were suffering tainted with death. Those screams were what make mothers wake up in the middle of the night with an uneasy feeling. They're the screams of people being in the most terrifying place of their lives with no way out. And I was trying to gather myself to help them as best I could. I run over to the truck, with the screams piercing through my heart, and pulling nerves from muscles and muscles from bone, cementing my movements little by little, till I'm barely moving when I reach the truck. Then I see it. A girl with no life in her body. A boy laying in the road next to the driver, his face laying in an all too big pool of his own blood. I shut down. I can't help these people, and that scares me more than anything. There is nothing I want to do more than help the lifeless girl or her friend screaming looking at her, but I can't. She's been gone. Hopefully before she knew she was going to depart this life onto whatever's next. My knees tremble. Darkness starts creeping from the other side of my vision. I'm about to pass out. Are you serious? I don't have time for this. I took a deeper breath, and the smell brought me back to the real world. Rubber, metal, burning plastic and copper. I put my hand onto the back of the driver of the truck, and notice his back is rising and falling. A bit quickly, but he's breathing, and I don't hear any bubbles or wheezing, so I figured nothing is blocking his airways. Then behind me a girl asks, "What's in the street?" That's when I see the most scariest shit I've ever seen in my life. I jump up and look into the middle of the intersection, where I see a small bundle of white fabric. My heart broke into 1,000 pieces. I knew what it was. She knew what it was. everyone knew what it was. No movement. I start walking over to the bundle, which I could make out to be a small blanket, and inside that, a baby. As I walk over, I didn't feel the cementing feeling in my muscles. A sense of urgency is commanding my sore muscles to movement. I couldn't stop walking if I wanted to. My brain shuts off all unnecessary feelings and emotions. If I pick up this baby and it's dead, I'll deal with that later. But right now, every fibre in my body needs to confront this and deal with what is in front of me. I need to get this baby out of the road. As I bend over and put my hands on what is hopefully a warm and squishy cute-ass baby, I see no movement, hear no crying, nothing. I pause, readying myself to bear what no one should ever have to carry. I carefully place my hands around the body of the baby, and that's when it hits me. A little wiggle. Still no crying. I move the blanket from the baby's face, and he's absolutely beautiful. He has a cut on his forehead, but aside from that, his face is something I'll never forget. It was a symbol of hope to me. Out of a terrible accident that can and did snatch someone's life away, this baby could be in my arms alive and okay, after being ejected from a truck, and it made my eyes full of tears. There was another baby ejected from the truck who was in a more serious condition, but she made a complete recovery. I can't bear to share any more details of that night, because I feel so drained now. A year and a half later, it still bothers me to go over all these details in my head. I am not a trucker, but I have been a dispatcher for many years and have seen and heard many things unfold. One of my drivers was making a delivery at a family dollar store in Detroit and had several black males rob them at gunpoint. He told the manager, "Give me the boxes, fat boy," and loaded up the back of the SUV with random family dollar shit. My driver asked me if they were going to call the police, and the store employee said, "Nah, happens all the time." Another driver called me from his floorboard parked at a stoplight in Detroit and said he needed me to call the cops because some kids were calling him cracker and throwing rocks at his truck. I had to instruct him to put on his big boy pants, get back into the driver's seat, and drive away. I saw a live feed from a Dallas terminal as trucks and trailers are flying through the air because an F5 tornado ran right over the Schneider yard. I also had a driver end his life by driving full speed into the Edwardsville, Illinois terminal, trying to take as many with him as possible. A driver yesterday told me on his return trip he saw a herd and family burning alive inside their vehicle, and that there was nothing he could do to help. Apparently there was a bad accident, and something happened to cause the large fire, which very quickly engulfed their vehicles. They weren't able to get out, and he was one of the very first to stop behind the accident and could hear them screaming. Another driver got distracted and didn't see traffic had stopped in front of him. He plowed into the back of another truck at about 60 miles an hour, and the entire cab of the truck looked like an explosion had been set off from the inside. The bunk/cabinets were on top of the cab, and the passenger seat was gone. You couldn't even tell it was still a truck if it didn't have the trailer sitting behind it, and he walked away without a single scratch. I'm sure there are plenty more stories that aren't coming to mind right now, but in short, truckers have definitely seen some shit. So my dad told me these stories a few nights ago. This happened to him when he was still a truck driver. He was an interstate truck driver for a company in South Australia, traveling all over the country, hauling various items. There was a particularly dark and stormy night. Hail, heavy rain, thunder and lightning, and you could hardly see the white line down the centre of the road. Now, these are rural Australian roads, no more than 2 lanes wide, and usually riddled with potholes and uneven surfaces. My dad said it was around 4 a.m, and he had been driving since 2, trying to meet a deadline for a delivery. In his side mirrors, he said he could see 2 Freightliners coming up behind him at a rapid speed, so he eased his foot off the accelerator and spoke over the UHF radio. "Come around, boys, road is clear." The 2 B-double trucks, hauling logs, came around and sped off into the distance. Not some 10 minutes later, my dad heard a frantic voice come over the radio. "Stop your truck, mate. I've hit a person." Going down the gears like the pro he is, my dad came to a stop behind the 2 trucks. He got out, and in the beam of the truck's headlight, he could see a mangled bicycle in the middle of the road. Some 60 meters away was a crumpled mess of blood and bones. It was a 14-year-old girl. The story goes that the girl sneaks out to visit a boy. She doesn't tell anyone where she's going. Because of the heavy rain and rural road, there are no lights. The little girl thought she was following the fog line, the closest line to the edge of the road, when she was actually following the white line in the center. One of the big B-doubles came speeding around a blind corner and hit her doing 80. She died on impact. There are a few stories like this, but this next one gives me chills. So my dad went from doing interstate truck driving to delivery grain to local farmers in the district. He became what us bogan Aussies love calling a wanker in a tanker, as they drive around carrying tanks full of grain to fill up a farmer's silo. There was one particular farm my dad had to go, where the farmer had to climb on top of the silo and do something for the new grain to be pumped into it. Because of this, my dad had specified to his boss that he wasn't going to make this run on a graveyard shift as it was too dangerous. Said boss then lied to my dad and told him the farmer had gotten a new silo and didn't have to climb to the top anymore, and this delivery would just be a standard delivery. Very reluctant, my dad gets into his truck and heads out to the farm, only to find nothing had changed. He's in the middle of nowhere with no phone reception, in the dark, waiting for Farmer Joe to turn up and climb this silo. The farmer, 60 years old, climbs the silo. My dad prepares everything ready to fill the silo and gets out of there, when he hears it. A muffled thud noise coming from beside the silo. The sound of something heavy landing in grass. "Help!" he heard a weak voice call, and then something dragging. The farmer came into view, dragging himself along the ground with some kind of farm machinery gorged onto his stomach, choking on his words and spitting out blood. Farmer Joe had fallen off the silo and impaled himself. Because of where the farmer was positioned, the truck couldn't be moved, so my dad ran to the nearest house 2 kilometers away for help. They called the ambulance and went back to help the farmer. Farmer Joe survived a couple more weeks before he died. Truck driving is not for everyone. My dad still works for that same company, but rarely goes out in the truck anymore. I'd just like to give a shout out to all you truck drivers. Without you, the world would be naked, sober, hungry, and homeless. So thank you for everything you do. I pulled over for a break on the way to Melbourne from Sydney at a truck stop. No street lights or anything, pitch black. No other trucks or cars at the stop. I turn off my lights, I switch the truck off and do the curtains, lock the truck from both sides and jump into bed, set my alarm and set my phone above me in the compartment. I was rolling over from side to side for about 5 to 10 minutes. I couldn't get to sleep due to it being prime summer temperatures, reaching around 30 degrees at night. I'm looking up at the ceiling, mentally planning out the day ahead, and suddenly, the passenger side door opens slightly, and the cabin light turns on. Now the truck is a fairly late model, but in pristine condition, so there are no questions about the door being faulty or anything. I just sat there for an eternity, expecting someone to come up and see me sitting there with the solid rod in my hand that we use for tightening belts. No one came up, nor was there any noise at all. Just quiet, eerie silence. I grabbed my torch and jumped down and walked around the truck. No other trucks were around, nor were there any other cars. It was just me and my fully loaded B-double. After around 5 to 10 minutes of getting screwed with, I locked up and went to bed again. I woke up next morning, yawned, fixed myself up along with the bed, opened the curtains, and there was a cemetery right next to where I'd parked. Hunger and laziness all escaped upon the realization. I grabbed my keys, put on my shoes, put on my pants, and switched the truck on and got out of there ASAP. I have another story. However, this one was my friend's dad. He was out of Perth, and this is the only story I've heard from him that really gives me the creeps. So he's driving back to Perth in convoy with a mate of his back to back throughout the night. Through the Nullarbor. If you know anything about Aboriginal legends, the Nullarbor is where the ancestral spirits walk. It's also prime Yowie country. They radio each other because they realise they need to rest and decide to sleep through to dawn and make Perth in the morning. So they pull over in the middle of this vast nothingness, lock down and hunker down for the night. At some point in the blackness, my friend's dad wakes up with this intense feeling of being not just watched, but stared down. He's not a superstitious guy either. He's a proper no-nonsense country man. He said he just had this gut feeling that someone was out there and wanted him gone. He says he scrambles up to the cab, chucks his keys in, and turns his lights on. And that at that exact moment, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, his mate does the same. Both trucks roar to life, and they take off down the highway without a word spoken between them. Later, his mate tells him that he felt the same predatory stare and fear for his life so hard that he just had to go too. I am a truck driver. I've seen a lot of stuff, mostly UFO/supernatural. You see it all out on the interstate. Within the first few months of driving, if I remember correctly, the incident was in Pennsylvania. My first couple of years I was a night driver, so it was hard to see things sometimes. But the one in Pennsylvania was me trying to follow a flatbedder who was hauling serious arse through the mountains. At one point, I was starting to fall back because I can feel the van starting to lean. It wasn't before long after I reached down to take a swig of the handy monster I had. I look up and there's a guy standing off the shoulder, just looking outside the tree line, wearing what appeared to be some type of soldier's uniform. Looked like Revolutionary War era. He had a musket as well. As I approach, I can see him staring right at me, and then he starts walking into the tree line, still looking at me. Before he managed to make it to the trees, he disappeared, like literally vanishes into thin air. I had my windows down, and the air in the area got really cold. After about a mile, it warmed up again. I had a really sad feeling come over me for a while after. Needless to say, I didn't stop for the rest of the shift. New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah are some states that to this day, I still see shit in the skies that I can't explain. Lights rapidly changing directions and taking off at blinding speeds, but no sound barrier being broken. I've seen lights hovering over the desert, several miles off the interstate. Then it suddenly takes off, and the lights cut out. Various shapes and sizes from what I can make out. I know military aircrafts pretty well, and some of them more than likely were, but some of them absolutely cannot be any military aircraft currently in mainstream use. Conventional aircrafts do not move like that. The most vivid one would be at an off-ramp in New Mexico. I stopped to take a leak and decided to turn it into a 15-minute break, since my ass was sore anyway. As I'm stargazing and admiring how clear the sky is, I saw what looked like a formation of lights in the shape of a triangle lift off from the desert floor, and then take off into the sky. I kept my eyes on it, and it just kept gaining altitude until the lights just disappeared. I look down at my watch and notice it's not ticking. So I pull out my phone and it's off. I turn my phone on, and according to the time on my phone, it had been 5 minutes since my watch stopped. I felt like whatever it was that just took off had something to do with it. Kent, Texas is another one. There's an old Chevron station. I think it is. Seems like FedEx drivers like stopping there in droves. I'm guessing it's a popular drop and hook point for them, or something like that. But one day I stop and need to take a leak. I don't know why I didn't stop in Van Horn, so I pull off, and I roll up to one of the empty lots across the street. Kent is an abandoned town. I walk up to the bush line and notice a makeshift fire pit. The wood is somewhat burnt, but not all the way. The weird thing is that there's an unscathed dollar bill stuck in the wood. For a second I was like, ooh, piece of candy. But then, this sudden feeling of nope came over me. So I left it alone and went to do my business. As I'm walking back, I look over at it and get a really negative feeling. I look to the ground in front of me, and bam, there's a rattlesnake looking right at me. I stop dead in my tracks and walk carefully around it, and it keeps staring at me. I ran as fast as I could back to my truck, feeling like somebody was behind me. I kicked up a lot of dust getting out of there, and have never stopped in Kent since. Missouri. I stopped off at an off-ramp to stretch out and take a breather. As I'm smoking a cigarette, a little girl from some direction, I couldn't figure out which, giggles and says, "Hi, mister." My initial reaction was, what the hell's a kid doing out here at this time? So I talk back and say hello. She then responds with, "My mummy says you'll be okay. Don't worry." Now utterly confused, I asked her what she meant. No response. Then suddenly I feel like someone is standing next to me. But it doesn't feel negative or bad. It just feels like someone's right there with me. Since I didn't have a negative vibe to it, I just finished my cigarette and left. Later on down the road, I realized that I forgot to fuel up at my last stop when the warning light came on. So I scrambled to look at my GPS and find the nearest truck stop. I find one and set the course. As I roll up to the truck stop, my truck starts sputtering, and I barely make it to the fuel line before the truck starts dying. I ran out of fuel right as I got to the fuel line. It wasn't until I was fueling up that it occurred to me what the hell happened at my last stop. I've also had lots of lizards try the good time routine with me. One in particular got up on my truck and started talking to me. Her breath was pretty bad, not something I wanted to smell as I'm doing my logbook and getting ready to shut down. She tells me she'll give me the best blowjob I've ever had, and for a second, I think about it. Nope. Then for some reason, she reaches down her spandex shorts and scratches herself deep. Her hand comes back up to the door, and I can smell the most rancid crotch rot my nostrils have ever been blessed with. As politely as I could, I declined her services and told her I really needed to get some sleep. She smiles and wishes me a good night, then hops onto another driver's truck across the way. 10 minutes later, she's in his truck, and it's not before long you see the cab rocking. I ate my granola bar and noped the hell out of the sleeper and went to bed. On one occasion in Arizona, there was a lady begging for money, which wasn't uncommon at truck stops. She gave me the whole sob story of her boyfriend leaving her and that she didn't have a job, that she lost the apartment and that her 2 kids were hungry, and she didn't really know what to do. Me being a social creature, I let the conversation go on for some reason. To make it short, she was molested by her father as a child, raped on several occasions in her teen years, and then found a lesser of an evil boyfriend who tried to get her into drugs, got her pregnant, and beat her all the time. I hear that kind of stuff a lot, but just in case she's telling the truth, I give her what I had in my pocket, which ended up being about $40. She broke down and cried right there. And then I started to wonder that maybe she was telling the truth. She walked away after a bit more small talk. I go inside to get dinner, and bigger than shit, I see her with the 2 kids that look as sad as can be getting dinner. They all looked desperate. I knew that then she wasn't lying about anything she told me, and I felt a lot more remorse for not doing more. So I told the waitress to put their meal on my tab. The look on her face when the waitress told her that their meal was being paid for by someone else was a look I will never forget. I've seen drivers duke it out on the fuel lines many times. I've seen brawls happen in the back of truck stops. Many rookies hitting other trucks by accident. You name it. The most memorable fight was when I was on a trip with a co-worker, who we shall say our partnership fell apart really fast on the way home. In Arizona, I stop at a truck stop between Flagstaff and the California state line. After an eternity, I finally get pull up on the fuel line. I fuel up, I go inside to use the restroom and get something to drink and snack on. I come back and the sleeper curtain is open. No co-driver. Lonely. 30 to 45 minutes go by, and he comes out. That's cool. Take your time, because I ain't stopping from here on out. Get it all out. I put some trash in a couple of bags and put it on the floor. It was mostly his trash from his shift prior that I couldn't stand having in the cab anymore. He opens the doors and dumps the bag on the ground. So I lit his ass with all the fury that I could muster. 2 garbage cans 20 feet away. Holy shit, no. I go put the bags in the trash cans and come back to the truck. As I'm doing my logbook, I look up and glance at my mirror. I see 2 drivers flapping wings at each other, getting a big dick. Oh, good a fight, let's watch. Suddenly they go at it like baboons. Fists flying, but they're not landing any hits. Then one of the drivers picks up the trash can and throws it at the other driver. The can hits him square in the face and blows open with paper towels going all over the place. WWE just rolled into town apparently. So I get out and start walking back to watch. And apparently, every other driver on the fuel line had the same idea. The driver who got trash canned reaches into the storage compartment of his truck and pulls out a huge chainsaw with a big ass padlock on it. Swings furiously as he's coming back to the front of the truck where the trash canner is. Mr. Chain Gang takes out the pump, takes out his driver's side window, knocks the mirror off his truck, and puts a huge gouge in his fender. Then, he makes it to the trash canner. The guy runs around the other side of the fuel pump, grabs and squeegee, and starts beating Chain Gunner with it. All it does is wet the guy and piss him off more. So now it's a battle of melee weapons. Enough time rolls by that they realise neither weapon of choice is going to do any good. So in an epic sequence of moves, they bear hug the living shit out of each other, and flop around on the ground and start bicycling each other. I walk inside and tell the lady that there's a fight on the fuel line, and she bolts out the doors and breaks them up, like a chaperone breaking up 2 kids fighting in the playground. All of this because supposedly Chain Gang said some shit to Trash Canner's wife. His argument was that he didn't do shit. He just walked up and started picking a fight. I believe the Chain Gunner more than the Trash Can guy. I formerly worked for a regional car wash chain and was pretty well trained in maintenance and upkeep for them. One of my managers also owned some self-service bays scattered across the Midwest, and I'm not sure what our company thought of it, but they were usually in small remote towns and never competed with anyone, so I didn't think they cared too much. Anyway, I would drive all around the Midwest every few weeks to deliver the chemicals to these places and do upkeep for him. The first comes from a time I went up to North Dakota. I was coming back and passing through a pretty remote area of Wyoming, and it was getting pretty late, and I was having trouble staying focused. So I decided to pull over and sleep in my truck. I drive a crew cab and would usually just push the seat forward and sleep on the back bench. I was off a state highway just south of Gillette, and there was no traffic passing by, just some train tracks. I'm a pretty heavy sleeper, so almost nothing will wake me. I'm also an early riser, so I wake up at around 4:30, put my boots back on, and slip into the driver's seat and take off. It's dark as hell and super windy. I get driving down the road and hear a banging coming from my bed. I looked behind me and didn't see anything, so I kept driving. Then on the window. I turn again and see a hand hitting my back window. I stopped and got out to find a homeless guy laying in the bed of my truck. Turns out he had hopped a train and jumped off a few miles from where I was and wanted a place to sleep out of the Wyoming wind. I ended up giving him a ride to town. He was a pretty nice guy, and we both ended up laughing about it. The second comes from when I drove down to Texas. I was coming back up to Colorado, and once again it was getting late and I was tired. I was up in the Panhandle, probably north of Dumas, and pulled over into a tiny little gas station. It only had a few lights over the lone gas pump, and not a soul around. It was raining pretty heavily, and this time I had stuff in the bed. I'm a heavy sleeper, right? And the sound of summer rain in rural Texas put me to sleep pretty damn easily. At around 2 a.m., I wake up to knocking. I look around and didn't see anything, and assumed it was the wind or thunder or something like that. I started to fall asleep again, but boom, it happened once more. It sounded like metal tapping on metal. So I put my boots and rain jacket on, grab my mag light, and step out of the truck and look out again. Nothing. Not a soul in sight. I get back in and fall asleep again until about 3:30. Again banging. This time I'm just pissed. I can't sleep. I grab my shotgun and step out and say, "Stop banging my truck, arseholes." The rain gets heavier, and I fall asleep until my alarm goes off at about 4:45. When I wake up, I start to roll forward, but realize there was something that had come out of my bed and was on the ground where I parked. I grabbed it and see something on the ground. From the field I was parked next to, I see a set of boot prints on the ground. Not mine. I wear true cowboy boots with a pointed toe. These were square-toed. I got back into my truck and drive like a bat out of hell until I hit the New Mexico line around the time the sun was coming up. I've never been able to explain that. Nothing was in that field. Not a house, not a farm, not a factory. Nothing. This story happened about 15 years ago, give or take. I was doing a really long shift and desperately needed to go to the toilet. However, knowing my route really well, I knew that there was absolutely nowhere to stop for miles. And having held it in for a while already, I thought it was time I pull over somewhere and take a leak. So that's what I do. I go out into the bush and start doing my business. And just as I'm walking back, I see the most peculiar thing. A discarded plush. It was a plush of Kenny from South Park, a show that I vaguely remember watching at some point. I took pity on the poor thing. It looked like half of its body had been burnt. Not really sure why, but I thought I could do with a companion, and picked it up, dusted it off a little bit, put it in my truck, and drove off. When I made it to the truck stop that night, I was filling in my logbook, and just making sure that everything was in order before I went to bed. I had an early morning, and wanted to get as much sleep as possible. I was just getting my book, so that I could tell myself I'd read, but after reading a page would doze off, and halfway through my read, I hear something very small. I look up and see that my light is flickering. I find it a bit odd, so I decide to turn it off and on again, and that does the trick. 15 minutes later, I fall asleep. The next morning I'm awoken by my alarm and make preparations to go and do the drive. That's when I notice something weird. The Kenny plush wasn't where I left it. I thought it was strange. I have a brief look around the truck and can't find it anywhere. I get a bit confused, so I open the door and look around on the ground. It's not there either. Whatever. It was a toy. I didn't have time to think about it. Easy come, easy go. So I get going and continue on the road. A few days later, I'm doing another run, and the Kenny doll hasn't been seen in a while. I have to stop to have my lunch, as I hadn't eaten in hours and really could use with a sit-down meal, as I was getting truly exhausted. So I pull over and pretty much tell myself that this is going to be it for the night. I get out, go have my food, and make it back. When I get back, I start making preparations to go to bed. And that's when I look over and I see the Kenny doll is back. I get a little bit freaked out. It was in my seat. There was absolutely no way it could have got there. I hadn't been sitting on it for a few days. That's absurd. And there's nowhere hanging overhead that it could have been. I find myself profoundly confused. There's no way I could have a stowaway either. I was just kind of losing it a little bit. So I kick it under my seat and go to sleep. The next morning I wake up and can't find my keys. I'm having a proper panic attack, and then I find them on the floor near where the doll is. I just about had it. Something was wrong. Something was weird, and it all started happening since I'd picked up this stupid doll. What was I saying, I thought? Could it be possible that the doll was doing this? Or was I just really tired yesterday? I wasn't really sure. I don't believe in any paranormal stuff, and the way I saw it is admitting that the doll had anything to do with this would be admitting that the paranormal was real, and I wasn't sure if I could do that. So I pretended there was nothing wrong with the doll and told myself that the keys had probably just fallen out, or maybe I moved them in my sleep. I don't know. I just tried to convince myself that there's no way it could have been the doll. Which it couldn't have been. It's a plush. It didn't even have fingers. Whatever. I was done. I get on my way and continue with my shift. About a week later, things hadn't gotten any better. Random things would go missing. My logbook would be moved, and I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, picking up the passenger had something to do with it. I was driving along and was contemplating what to do with the doll. I wondered to myself, if I got rid of it and everything stopped, does that mean that this thing is cursed or something? I wasn't sure, and the pity that I originally had that made me pick it up to begin with had quickly worn off. While I was driving in the middle of nowhere, I decided I was going to give the doll a new home. I picked it up and launched it out the window, and I saw it hit the other side of the road and then tumble onto the dirt. I was glad it was gone, and wondered to myself if everything would go back to normal. Surprise, surprise, it did. So there you have it. I may or may not have been temporarily haunted by a creepy Kenny doll. Obviously, I don't know what became of that doll. I drove through that road again sometime later, and I tried to keep my eye out for it, but saw nothing. If you picked up that doll and something creepy happened to you, I'd love to hear about it. It may solidify my belief that there was something off with that plush. I live in the US, and I drive over the road, typically 3 weeks at a time, and go from one side of the country to the next, but typically stay between Texas and northeastern states. Anyway, I've had plenty of stories about lot lizards, trucks tipping over in front of me, and I have pics to prove it as well. People begging for cash, people trying to get into my truck in the middle of the night, and the works. However, I will never forget this one time. In fact, it only happened 3 weeks ago. I was stopped in Maryland at a tiny truck stop that can hold 5 to 6 trucks. Typically, truckers will go to a Pilot, Flying J, Loves, etc. However, I've always liked going to the smaller, lesser-known ones, because spots are almost always available, and no one messes with me. Anyway, I finished almost 11 hours of driving, and it's around 2 AM, and I am extremely tired. I have a long day ahead of me. Not unusual, but tonight was different. I'm back into a small spot, just me. There's no lights, nothing. Everything is off, and the only light is from the lightning, because it's storming at the time. Anyway, I'm getting ready to unwind and go into the sleeper. But something kept me from doing that immediately like I always do. I locked my doors, finished some paperwork, and then just kept looking at the sky through my windshield. Maybe 5 minutes go by, when all of a sudden, I get this overwhelming sense of fear come over me. And when this happens, I see this ball of purple, white, bluish light in the clouds just dance. I guess I can call it dancing, because that's what it looked like. So here I am, dead tired, scared shitless, staring at this ball of light dancing within the clouds. It was terrifying and mesmerizing at the same time. I used to work distribution at a bread plant, and there's one memorable experience involving a truck. Corporate just implemented this dolly-less loading system that involved putting product on tiny 4-wheeled trolleys. You stacked up your bread, your pies and the like onto trays that sit on these trolleys and roll them into the trailer. Easy as pie. Engineers had concluded to hold back these stacks from flying out the back, you'd install a strap every second row of stacks, so 4 stacks in a row. Well, corporate didn't send us enough of these straps, and we ran out of these straps for 1 load, save 2. We told our boss that we couldn't send a load because we didn't have enough. So he storms up to the dock and tells us lazy dogs to just use the 2 straps at the back. So we did. I mean, it's not likely they can hold back 10,000 pounds of force or anything. The driver pulled out the load and maybe got 25 feet before physics took over, and I saw the doors fly open and 140 times 4 times 48 loaves of bread slide out the back like a waterfall. The 2 straps snapped right in half and flung into the wall of the trailer, making a 2-inch long gash. The trailer itself lunged forward as if this mysterious force propelled it forward. It took 4 guys 8 hours to clean it all up. No trucks could enter or leave until it was all gone. This also happened around midnight, when all the long-haul drivers delivered the products to smaller distribution centers across the country for further distribution to stores. It rippled to other distribution centers, causing them to give away overtime to shippers after they basically sat around and watched TV for 8 hours, waiting for their loads. They even had to call a wrecking crew to pull the trailer aside. The sudden 20,000 pounds of force had damaged the frame so badly, the driver refused to pull it. Customers got pissed off because their deliveries were late, arriving around midday. That all combined with the actual dollar value of the product, it probably cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars. They started taking me seriously after that, and I was demoted to production. Grab the bread, load the bread, wipe the sweat. The boss got a nice promotion and a cushy office job. There was this other time where a couple of crackheads set a load on fire in our yard, and nobody noticed there was a 50-foot tall fire in the yard for hours. I loved working there mostly for the huge amount of what the hells you saw on a daily basis. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's installment of Trucker Stories. If you did, please don't forget to leave a comment down below with your thoughts and hit that lovely like button. Don't forget that I post new content every night, so be sure to subscribe and hit the little bell icon to be up to date every time I post and be notified of your nightly spooks. And if there's a story that you wish to share, please don't forget to send it to my email or share it to my Reddit. Either are fine, and just make sure you include a load of description, punctuation and paragraphing, as that will maximize the chances of your story being selected. But anyway, for now guys, I'm going to sign off. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.